Greetings on Alara TV, and I'm happy to say that today we have a very special guest with us, Mark Carlotto. My co-hosts are Anastasia and Jason, and we are really honored and thrilled to have Mark Carlotto, who is an aerospace engineer with over 30 years of experience in remote sensing, pattern recognition, computer vision, signal and image processing, and terrain mapping. Mark holds a Ph.D. in electrical engineering and has more than 100 publications and several books in a number of areas. Mark's name is closely associated with the face on Mars, UFO video analysis from space shuttle missions STS-48 and STS-80, and his expertise and multidisciplinary approach allows Dr. Carlotto to address challenging scientific problems and find beautiful solutions. In his recent book, Before Atlantis, he talks about previous technological civilizations, which existed over 80,000 years ago on Earth. And today we will talk with Dr. Carlotto about megalithic structures on Mars and Earth.
Mark, welcome to the show. We are so happy that you are joining us.
Hi guys, nice to be with you.
And we are so honored, and for us, it would be very interesting, first of all, to learn about your motivation and inspiration and what motivates you to do your research and share knowledge, because the majority of subjects which you were studying, like using mathematical methods, using really deep scientific understandings, it's essentially not published or not really recognized by the official science. Could you please tell us about this?
Well, I think physical science does its best to explain reality. But, it's clear that there's more to reality than just, physical explanations. And so what I try to do is sort of push the physical science as far as it'll go to kind of fill in those gaps. And it's tricky territory because there's a lot of people that attempt to do that without any evidence or any kind of basis. And they get into trouble with skeptics, people that, are not, they get into trouble with skeptics and also believers. The skeptics will not accept what they're saying, and the believers will accept it without any critical thought. So what I try to do is put out as much as I can with some kind of a scientific basis, some sort of data, some sort of math models behind it that can be used to sort of support it or justify it.
That's an excellent point. Absolutely, that's an excellent point to push the realm of physical science and analysis and measurement possibilities in order to address those challenging questions that are often confronted by people who do this and run into skeptics that seem to be more knowledgeable than they are making their hypothesis. I think that's a valid point. We understand you've been working a very long time on deciphering and analyzing the Cydonia region on Mars. Are there any new technologies that would allow automating the search of similar monuments, not just there, but here on Earth or on asteroids or on the moon? And can you share that with us?
Sure. When I first began to do this, it was in the 80s, and the 80s was a really interesting time, a really seminal time in the tech arena. That's when artificial intelligence and computer graphics and weird new ideas, they really weren't that new, but they were being applied in new ways, things like fractals for generating, photorealistic images. Computer graphics was just an amazing new field that was taking over and creating these new virtual worlds. I mean, nowadays, it's hard to tell the difference between real and fake. The CGI technology is just so amazing. So what we did back in the 80s was begin to apply fractals, which are used often in modeling, to say, okay, let's try to analyze the background, analyze the terrain, the surface of Mars, for example, and see what doesn't model well with a fractal. The idea of a fractal is that they're good models for physical phenomena, because physical phenomena are self-similar. A part of of the whole, or part resembles the whole. And it's a self-similarity that you can actually model mathematically and create algorithms to, basically run across an image and find those parts that do not behave like fractal models. And this is what we did with the face on Mars. And this is, one of the indicators we came up with for showing that there's some quantitative difference between the face and the, surrounding landforms. And so, this was sort of what we were doing back then. Now, it's 40 years later, almost 40 years later, is that we have some really cool technologies. First of all, computers back then, had the capability. I mean, my cell phone here was more powerful than the computers we were using in the 80s. We had big disk drives and images were printed on line printer paper. It was, quite primitive. Now, with computing technology being what it is, we have new possibilities. And I think the two areas that I think are potentially really significant, first of all, is convolutional neural networks. The idea of using machine learning to develop models for sort of what natural might look like, sort of like we were doing with fractals, and use that to detect what is not natural, because when you think about it, you really can't train a neural network. You can't do machine learning to find alien intelligence because we don't have any examples of it, right? So it's kind of problematic. But if we turn it around, we could maybe use it in a way to eliminate what's natural in the same way that we're using fractals. So I think CNN technology might be an exciting new application, a new area, and crowdsourcing. I think getting people involved. The SETI community was using that to some extent in their listening strategies for ET radio signals. And I think it could be also used nowadays for, with so much imagery of the moon and Mars out there, a lot of people are looking at it. And you can get a lot of people involved in that. And I think just buying into that gives them a sense of discovery, which is, discovery and, creativity. Those are, among the more noble human virtues. And if we can, whatever we can do to encourage that, I think is a good idea.
Mark, thank you so much for answering that in the way that you did. And you're referencing at the beginning, you're discussing our discovery of the Mandelbrot set, right? Fractals and our observance of them. And that's when computer graphics and things like that took off in that era. And now, like you just said, you can't tell the difference between a green screen and whether or not someone's there. So I think that's right. Pretty cool to highlight how technology has evolved for us. And since you mentioned the evolution aspect of this technology, due to the advent of this technology, has there been any new discoveries by you or your colleagues or you would like to share with us in relation to what you study? Have we been able to use this new technology to find new discoveries?
So, I don't know to what extent it's being applied by the professionals doing the work. I continue to be involved. Several years ago, we applied basically the same approach to examine some anomalies on the backside of the moon. Again, indications from, using an algorithmic approach where that these structures were different from the background. These are some unusual objects in the crater Paracelsus C. Aside from that, the surface of Mars has been covered, to my knowledge, pretty well. And what people are finding, I think, are sort of more of what we saw in Cydonia. Cydonia is the region where the city and the face are located. It's in the northern hemisphere on Mars. along the shoreline of what was once likely a large northern sea when Mars had water, many, many millions of years ago. What we're finding, what people are finding in other parts of Mars are similar types of eroded structures. And the problem with a lot of them is it's really, there's indications of symmetry and architectural alignment. I don't think they're as compelling as those in Cydonia. I think, ironically, the first discoveries on Mars made by Viking in '76 were, I think, perhaps the most compelling. But there are other discoveries, other interesting looking objects, triangular structures, pentagonal structures, rectangular structures. But the state of them is such that they're really hard to assess as culture, as some kind of material culture, or archaeology. And there's a similar thing you run into in the desert. There are highly eroded structures in Egypt, in the Middle East, that have become so degraded that they're almost impossible to identify it as artificial structures. And then you also have geology working sort of in its own funny way to make natural looking landforms look artificial. So you have this kind of, middle ground. It's like, how do you tell one from the other? And on Earth, archaeologists use context. They use other sorts of information. On Mars, we don't have that. But in a few years, hopefully, when we go there, I'm hoping Elon Musk will continue to be the innovative, forward thinker that he is, and land in Cydonia. Let's go right to the face and see what's going on there. I think there's a lot of uncertainty where we stand sort of with the surface features. But what I would conclude with is some ideas that we start to begin to look below the surface. And NASA and the SETI community announced a program they call Search for Technosignatures. And technosignatures are kind of like indicators of an intelligent civilization, a dead civilization, if you will. Could be byproducts, fission byproducts of nuclear reactors or a nuclear war. It could be archaeological structures, could be all sorts of things. But one thing they suggest, which I think is really interesting, is the idea of beginning to look below the surface using technology like ground penetrating radar to see what's below the surface. Because I think, like on Earth, the most interesting things are probably really buried deep, the oldest things. And if things have been buried on Mars for millions of years, billions of years maybe, we have to look deep. And so that's an interesting area that I hope will get some attention in the coming years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, yeah, and I like how you brought up, Gestalt illusions, if you will, and how we have to keep that in mind when searching for these things. And I absolutely agree that moving forward, we are going to have to go deeper, because we know more about the moon than we do about our own ocean, or what's even below the surface of the Earth. So thank you so much for those answers, and I absolutely agree with that. Alexei, you had the next question, I think.
Yes, and actually, anyone who has read your books can't argue with the fact that the pyramids are on Mars and the face were built by intelligent beings. And what does this say to us? What are the implications for us as a human race to know that, we are not the only ones in the universe, obviously, that there were probably some other civilizations before us. But what do you think, in general, what does it change? Why was it important for you to discover this and study these phenomena?
So, the one, I think probably the major criticism about these objects on Mars by the space community, by NASA and SETI and JPL, was if they were, well, based on their theories, Mars hasn't been habitable for a very long time. Not just millions or hundreds of millions, but billions of years, 500 million years at least. And so these objects can't be there, or there can't be a face on Mars because it just can't be there. It's sort of like a circular argument. And so, you know, discovering something so strikingly humanoid and nearby structures so strikingly architectural, and having all of this be apparently aligned, so some underlying plan. It's so much like the way we think and behave and build on Earth. It's, you know, it's striking that you would find that on Mars, and it's like, it gets you thinking, okay, if it's obviously not just 1,000 years old or a couple thousand. I mean, right now on Earth, you know, we're with discoveries like Göbekli Tepe, they're finding, you know, they thought, you know, was old in the past, 3,000, 4,000 BC. Now 10,000 BC is now beginning to look like the dawn of, you know, of modern man. But it may go back, and, you know, my Atlantis hypothesis goes back even further than that. So you look at the time frame. So if you know, Göbekli Tepe is 10,000 BC, and you look at Mars, which is, you know, hundreds of millions of years ago, it's a huge gap. So what do you do with that gap? First of all, it suggests that, hey, maybe we've been around a lot longer than we think. Maybe human evolution, the theories, which are constantly changing. I mean, right? Human genetics and genetic testing and technology and genetic science and all the studies that are now combining that with archaeology are finding human evolution is very complicated. There's no clear picture. We probably didn't originate out of Africa. It may have been Australia, but it may have been Africa, but it could be somewhere else. And there's just so much there's so many variables to try to account for. You know, it's still largely an unknown. And so to say that these structures on Mars are vastly older than man, we can't really say that, because we don't really know how old man is, or humankind would be the proper way of saying it. And so I think for me, the challenge is seeing if there's a way of bridging the gap between, if 10,000 BC is our, you know, our horizon here on Earth, and, you know, 500 million years is our horizon on Mars, how can that be filled in? And, you know, the before Atlantis hypothesis that there were previous civilizations on Earth that can be detected based on their alignment to previous poles, which is probably something we'll talk about later, I think is a way of maybe beginning to fill in that gap. Because it's got to be a continuum. I mean, it's got to all be connected. It's all one equation, and it's all got to make sense. But I think there's so many pieces that are missing. And, you know, what I do, and maybe we'll talk about it, is I think, you know, using other sources like mythology and, you know, probably the most ancient sources are probably the best to use that to fill in the gaps. Those are the breadcrumbs that are going to help us, you know, connect it all together. So I think I may have sort of gone off on a tangent. Did I answer your question?
I think you answered it wonderfully, and hopefully, okay. Hopefully my co-host with me will forgive me for this, but I must ask, in order to get behind how you carry out your methodology, do you start from a point of, okay, I know this and I believe this, and then you use your mathematical reasoning, you know, a certain probability range to push going beyond the normal realm of accepted science, and go, okay, well, I'm going to disprove this belief because I believe it? Or do you seek to prove a belief in order to make it a known?
What you're suggesting there is that there's any rhyme or reason in the way that I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there isn't.
How you carry that out. Okay, that's how passion works. So it's wonderful.
Well, no, I mean, what it is, you know, a lot of people, a lot of engineers, I'm an engineer by training. My Ph.D is in electrical engineering in EE. And, you know, we're taught to be problem solvers, but we, you know, generally approach things in a very sort of systematic way, sort of like the way you describe. It's also similar in science where, you know, you have a theory and then there's some new fact that conflicts with the theory, and then that causes you to, you know, come up with a new theory, new hypotheses, and new experiments and all that. It's sort of like in engineering, something doesn't work, you know, well enough, it's not fast enough or small enough, so you come up with some other idea. And, you know, it's so the way engineering and science works is very similar. I've been fortunate to be involved in you know, developing software applications and so forth that are generally, my job is you know, give us some new ideas in a certain area. And honestly, where those ideas come from, I can't say. I don't think I come up with them. I mean, you know, this is, you know, this is, I think so true. I think if we introspect, it's like, well, where do we come up with a lot of the things that we come up with? You know, when I first saw the picture of the face on Mars, it was in the Boston Globe, which is a newspaper here in Massachusetts. And I looked at it and it was like, you know, there's something about this that isn't right. You know, it was saying that NASA believes that it's just an eroded formation. And they were giving, you know, using technical terms like mesas and knobs like you find in the American Southwest. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's something about it that it just doesn't add up. So I think the intuition part is huge. And so I think the intuition is sort of what gets you started. And then, you know, the analytical mind starts thinking about it, but then you know, the ideas just come as needed, you know. I don't know. The thing is, what's tricky, I think, is, you know, that's also the realm of the imagination. So it's like, you know, where do you draw the line? And, you know, a lot of people in the ancient mysteries arena and UFO and Mars, they're very imaginative, creative people, and they come up with all sorts of hypotheses. And I look at them and it's like, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't know how I can, I don't know how I can justify it, or, you know, what does it mean? And, you know, so I think there's got to be sort of a balance. So you got this creative energy, this wellspring of ideas, but, you know, like knowing sort of where you say, okay, well, this is just sort of imaginative and speculative, which is that's fine too, right? Because that can get people inspired. So you don't want to be, you know, say, no, we don't do that, but you also kind of have to kind of, you know, keep it all, you know, sort of figure out where you are, know where you stand, so you're not you're not sticking your neck out too far.
Wow, that's awesome answer. Yeah, like, thank you very much. And it is so insightful. You know, like when you talk, I really have a lot of appreciation for your really scientific approach, because you, as you said, you are engineer and you start looking for the answers and connecting the dots, and then you see missing pieces. To me, it's so amazing to hear that you are also thinking that referring to the myths and legend can be valuable. Then we need to fill in these gaps, like between, for example, like these gaps that we see in these huge megalithic complexes we see on Mars, and we also have megalithic complexes on Earth, and it seems to be that it can be part of the same story, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Yes, and like, you know, just we had a recently interview with Dr. J.J. Hortek, who were also having a lot of applications on Mars, and just he was mentioning that probably it was humanoid type of race, and his interview with a tribe tribe had, one of African tribe had, he says that his people were living on Mars many years ago. So
yeah, once you get beyond physical science, it gets really, really interesting because there's all sorts of, there's the aboriginal dream time. There's the, in more, modern days, this whole idea of remote viewing and using, other modalities, other ways of collecting information. And, given the mind and beyond, what is really possible? I mean, it's hard to rule any of these things out. But connecting with, trying to get at the at sort of the non-physical or the, like, you mentioned the myths and legends. If if Earth has undergone a series of cataclysms, the last one being, say 15,000 plus or minus years ago. And we had been, up until that time, a fairly advanced society, technological society, like we are now. And Graham Hancock makes a great point. He explains this so well, how, our society now is so brittle. If there were a major cataclysm, what would happen to us? The cell phones would be useless. You wouldn't be able, you're basically going to become a hunter-gatherer again. How many people can survive that? So, it's that hunter-gatherer group that then somehow carried forward this knowledge of what came before them, in the form of myths and legends, oral traditions and so forth. So I think that is invaluable in filling in the gaps. I mean, I don't think it could ever be constituted as proof, but I think it's a good thing to get us started, and maybe to get to suggest sort of where we look and how the pieces might go together. It's so complicated. We have far more unknowns than we have measurements. And, in math, you got to have a certain, you have to have at least more measurements than unknowns. But we have certainly more unknowns than measurements. And so I think exploiting other sources of information like myths and legends it's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for that comment. And like we initiated this project, Kaleidoscope of Facts, and we are choosing one topic and we making research on that. And like we approach different scientists, and we want to understand what's going on in science right now. But we also found that often the artifacts or myths or legend, they are so helpful. And it seems to be this story which still have some recordings or like some narration, and it is still like some part of the information like in these myths and legends. And like just I also wanted to kind of switch back to your comment between this gap between Mars and Earth. And essentially we see these megalithic structures on Mars, and we do see this like similar megalithic structures on Earth. For example, like this Cydonia region, at least like my understanding was that, and I was reading your book, that it is located somewhere almost at the equator, similar to pyramids of Giza. And seems to be like there is similarities between Earth structures and Mars structures. And I have really, I don't know, just intuition really tells me that there is meaning on having these megalithic structures. It's not just like they were built for, I don't know, for everyday use. There is certain function of that. So what are your thoughts on this?
When you strip back, there's a lot of theories. There's theories that the pyramids are, or energy generating devices or power storage devices, that they were machines for to advance human evolution, to machines to expand consciousness, to sharpen razor blades. The one thing that it cannot be disputed is a pyramidal shape is probably the most stablest form in terms, architecturally, and geologically. It would be able to withstand probably more erosion and crustal earthquakes and tectonic processes, because it's a very stable object. It's it's heavier on the bottom than it is on the top, and it may be one of these sort of invariant forms that intelligent beings build because of its physical properties. Beyond that, I don't think there's any consensus on what they could be. They're clearly they clearly have an important symbolic function, because they're often built like the pyramids in Giza. They're built in alignment to the cardinal directions, very precisely aligned. Not exactly, but very, very close to north, south, east, and west. The pyramids on Mars in the face appear to be aligned in a direction that corresponds to a solstice, a summer solstice, sunrise, winter solstice, sunset direction. Because Mars is tilted on its axis, and like Earth, it has seasons. And so you would have the same sort of alignments taking place on Mars. What they also found, and Anastasia, you mentioned this about the it being close to the equator, being near the equator. There is also, it's well known that Mars has had a shift of its pole. The Tharsis Formation, this giant volcano on Mars, has caused the axis of the planet to shift it, because it's such a massive structure on the crust. When it was formed, it wasn't at the equator; it was at a higher latitude, and it creates an imbalance. So there was a shift in the basically in the pole, the Martian poles, at some point. This is long ago, but when but prior. So right now, it's the Tharsis Formation is at the near the equator, and Mars is in this equilibrium balance. But prior to it forming, the city and face would have been at a different location. They would have been close to the Martian equator, and their alignment would have been close to the cardinal directions. So that's kind of an interesting, and a astronomer by the name of Thomas Van Flandern came up with that. He passed away a number of years ago, and he had a lot of innovative ideas about Mars and other structures and objects in the solar system. So there's definitely a similarity there in terms of not just the architecture, the structure, but also the alignment. Why would you align something in such a in such an important way? I think it's to call its attention to it. It's to give it some importance, some symbolic importance. The city of Washington, D.C. was laid out by L'Enfant, in this north-southeast direction. This idea seems to be very prevalent on Earth. And if we find evidence of it on other planets, that's telling us that either we've been there, or that we share kind of a similar approach to things. But the thing is, there's so little data. It's really just informed speculation, unfortunately. But I think that there's enough there that we should be looking, because when we get there, I think we can ask some questions. We can ask questions, and we can look to see if there's other structures in other places that may be similarly aligned, that will then tend to reinforce, this narrative that it was a civilization on Mars. It wasn't just an isolated object, because I mean, that's also possible too. I mean, when you don't have really any data points, I mean, we're the only data point there is. We're the only established life form that we know of. So how do you extrapolate from that? It's tricky. It's really tricky to do that. So I think you got to be open to a lot of different possibilities.
Oh, yes, thank you. And well, either we've been there or they've been here. We still have to learn about this. And I think that right now we are coming up on the another question we wanted to ask you is related to your recent work, because you have studied astronomical cycles and have published work discussing the facts about like when you continued the theory proposed by Charles Hapgood in about the Earth's crust displacement in the distant past. And can you tell us what were your findings, and maybe there's a cyclical pattern to these shifts and orientation of the groups of magnetic structures?
Sure. So in the 1950s, a professor by the name of Charles Hapgood wrote this book, The Path of the Pole, and in a subsequent book, he also had been involved in looking at ancient maps, and he did this together with his students. A lot of it began as well. The students weren't terribly interested in what he was teaching, so he said, "Well, what would you like to do? And what would you like to research?" And they came up with ideas, and that sort of drove the process. And it was the kinds of questions people ask. There's these old maps, the Peary-Reese map. Where did that come from? Why does it show features that shouldn't have been known at that time in a map of that era? So at this time, there was a lot of curiosity about why are certain mammals found in places where they outside of their natural habitats, mammoths that were apparently flash frozen, and many other examples. I mean, it's clear that because of the way the Earth now, and this I should probably add, when Hapgood came up with this theory, it was before plate tectonics, continental drift was well accepted. It was in the process of finding evidence that using paleomagnetic information that yes, in fact, the Earth consists of all these plates that move, and the whole kind of crust moves around. And so some of that obviously can explain how over long periods of time, how species in one part of the world, one climate zone, shifted to another climate zone. But what Hapgood was finding that these changes occurred very quickly, to the extent that the undigested remains in the bellies of these animals were frozen along with the animals, and this wasn't just a one of a kind, two of a kind. Excuse me. He was finding quite a bit of evidence of this, and so he came up with this theory that rather than the ice ages being the result of the Earth, getting warmer, getting cooler, that it was caused by the crust of the Earth actually shifting. So if you imagine the Earth is like an orange, and the mantle and the core are the inner part, the crust is the skin on the top, and imagine that the skin is loose and it can slip over the inner part. He proposed that, and this was his original idea, was that a buildup of ice in the polar regions or around the polar regions would create an imbalance and cause the crust it would torque the crust and cause it to shift. Sort of like, we're talking about on Mars with the Tharsis Formation. And it turns out the mass of the Greenland ice sheet is, during the time of the last ice age, was comparable to that. I mean, it's, you know, in same orders of magnitude. It's a lot of ice there. So his theory was that the buildup of the ice caused the crust to shift to sort of restore the equilibrium of the, you know, of the planet. And by doing so, as the crust shifted, what had been in the polar zone now gets shifted to a lower latitude, and as a result, the climate changes. You know, you can imagine if the North Pole, the Arctic suddenly got shifted to you know, Central Europe. Well, you know, lots of things are going to happen. The ice is going to melt, and the climate's going to change. And so his explanation for climate change was a lot simpler. That, yeah, the Earth does undergo periods of warming and cooling based on solar cycles and subtle changes in Earth's orbit and so forth. But the big factor was the crust shifting. And so he proposed this idea, which actually, you know, we were talking about ancient myths and legends. Some of the codices that the Spanish, the few that they did not destroy when they conquered Mexico, do talk about prior ages, and make reference to cataclysms that, you know, some interpretations had to do with crustal shifts or changes of the Earth's axis. So it was kind of an old idea that he put some scientific substance to with a theory, and then he had, you know, this book is just, you know, it's just filled with data. I mean, he goes through, you know, lots and lots of cases, and actually this work is ongoing. If I may, a colleague of mine has written this book. Mark Gaffney is his name, and he's found additional evidence supporting Hapgood's theory. In fact, he's helped me. Together, we've kind of come up with some refined pole positions that, you know, maybe we'll talk about. You know, getting back to Hapgood, he proposed that there were 3 previous locations of the North Pole. You know, currently we're in the Arctic. The North Pole is in the Arctic, and the South Pole is in the Antarctic. But prior to that, about 12 to 18,000 years ago, the North Pole was in Hudson Bay, which is in Canada. And before that, it was in Greenland. And before that, it was in the Yukon Territory in Western Canada. And this was based, again, on seeing the patterns of climate change that he observed in you know, in types of data that he was analyzing. Mark Gaffney has actually found some more recent data that support the poles that I talk about in Before Atlantis. So I don't know if we want to. Sorry, I kind of got a little bit, maybe a little too far into that. I don't know if there was anything else about Hapgood we should talk about. But anyway, Hapgood got it all started, and it remains an unproven theory, of course, because we haven't, you know, it's like, you know, we haven't experienced a crustal displacement. If we do, we'll probably, you know, we'll end up just being a bunch of hunter-gatherers again, and we probably wouldn't even really care. We'll be more concerned about getting our next meal than whether the theory was correct. So it'd be truly academic at that point. But anyway, so, you know, Hapgood was the guy that kind of got it all started.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I hope that we can be more intelligent and united, maybe solve these problems, even if they occur, and be above hunter-gatherers if they ever were on this planet. But
yeah.
Anyways, I guess that there is some cyclicity in what's happening on this planet and other planets of our solar system. So yeah, and we can maybe get also into this. Jason, you wanted to ask, I think, the next question.
I'm actually going to have a two-part question for you, so excuse me for that. You've studied these astronomical cycles and have published these works and facts, especially about the phenomena that was known to the ancients, and it seems almost a bit disingenuous to not explain it. But can you explain for our audience and us how supposedly these primitive people had these abilities and the comprehension to try and warn us, or to make known that these cycles are in fact cycles and repeatable and observable? Can you explain that for us?
This is a little bit outside of my area of expertise. You know, the one thing what I do is pretty interdisciplinary, and you can get really kind of, you know, you can get a little far afield sometime. You know, a lot of Jason, what you're asking has to do with, you know, translation, interpretation of codices and hieratic texts and you know, cuneiform, you know, tablets, cylinder seals, and so forth. You know, the picture appears to be that that primitive peoples did not have the capability to create, certainly to create the artifacts, the archaeology that that we find that remains today. You know, the pyramids are one example. The megalithic structures in Peru's Sacred Valley, in the Middle East at Baalbek, you know, throughout the world, we strain our imaginations to you know, to try to imagine how, you know, copper or Bronze Age technologies could have produced these structures. And then it gets even, you know, trickier once we start, you know, looking at the heritage of knowledge and wisdom that gets passed down from these ancient people. It certainly seems more than you know, hunter-gatherers would be interested in. And you know, the explanations that science gives, you know, where at some point we became agricultural and suddenly we started to become interested in the big questions in the cosmos. You know, it's I don't know, it seems again, it's one of those things when like I said, when I looked at the face on Mars in the Boston Globe and the newspaper, it's like, you know, something just doesn't seem right there, just doesn't add up. So I think it's clear, and I think what's emerging is this notion that there has been throughout our history some other phenomenon that's been present, and you know, some interpret that phenomenon as ancient aliens, that they're coming from some other place. But you know, we don't really know that. They could be coming from some other realm. You know, we've been talking about physical science, but that, you know, clearly physical science can explain, you know, only so much. I mean, physical science can explain intelligence and creativity. I mean, all it can explain is how you can dump a bunch of facts into a convolutional neural network or some other AI device, and it'll basically spit out, you know, what it already knows. It's not going to come up with anything new. Where does that, you know, where does that new, those new ideas come from? And so, you know, I think it's clear that there's something beyond the physical, and it may be more than just in our minds. It actually they may have had physical instrumentality. You know, it could be, you know, the source of the myths and legends in biblical texts and other texts, that there, you know, there were others, and there are others, because, you know, the UFO phenomenon continues. It's an ongoing phenomenon. And, you know, I spent some time analyzing a UFO video over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. How is that? If you see this video, it's amazing. How is that any different from the descriptions in the book of Ezekiel. So it's like, I think it's an ongoing phenomenon. And I think the ancient alien interpretation came about because, when Erich von Däniken first came up with these ideas in the 60s, it was in the middle of the space program. We were racing you guys to get to the moon. And, it was like everything anyone talked about. It was like, but now, now we're not really talking about that as much. We're talking about other things. And so it's, I think the interpretation is a little bit fluid right now. I think clearly there's a phenomenon that exists there. And that has been responsible for this ancient knowledge and all these unexplained, evidence of all this unexplained technology on Earth and maybe even on Mars. But again, this is kind of tricky because, people listening to this, I'm sure there's going to be people out there saying, oh, he's kind of gone off the deep end. He's saying that there's, something that science can't explain. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's something science can't explain. But science, I think science can prove that there are phenomena that exist that we cannot explain. It can, and I think the UFO literature, the videos and the imagery that are just becoming more and more widespread, CGI technology notwithstanding, some of the shuttle videos you mentioned earlier, shot in the 80s before CGI, by NASA, they're not going to be hoaxing video, UFO videos in the space shuttle. So you start to see things that are measurable, unexplainable, and based on the analysis beyond current technology. So what does that say? Could be extraterrestrial? Well, it could be, but on the other hand, why has the SETI community not picked up any radio signals? Why have we actually not even detected a single we haven't even detected a microbe on Mars yet. I mean, we talked about it, and I realize I'm going off a little bit on a tangent here, but the point is that there's so much that we don't know. I think we have to be open to possibilities, but to be honest with ourselves, that there's stuff, there's megalithic structures, there's knowledge, ancient knowledge that goes beyond where humankind was at that time. And so what does that mean? An earlier civilization or civilizations, or something else, or maybe both? It's fun. There's a lot to figure out.
Yes, thank you. And it's great, actually. We tried to uncover a lot of this, and we think there was both ancient civilizations and aliens, and this has not stopped. And regarding the thing why SETI or other research projects didn't capture anything, there is a quite simple answer that look, we still use quite primitive technologies that use radio waves, and the propagation of these waves is very slow in space. It is much faster in like liquid or solid material, obviously, but not in space. And we have these technologies only for like a couple of 100 years at most. Yeah. And imagine that we that we think that we will be capturing the same kind of waves that we can interpret. But if imagine today we switch on a satellite dish that captures this kind of signals, but the signal that the other civilization sent in the same frequency range that we can capture, they sent it like several light years before that, and they just passed us a minute before we launched our satellite dish to capture the signal. So this can easily answer why we could not capture any signals.
Yes, and that's one explanation. another explanation is that we're under some kind of cosmic embargo, and they don't want to make their presence known to us quite yet. And you know, sort of behind this is the idea of sort of like a Star Trek universe, a federation, right? Where there, and this is the assumption in SETI. You know, a lot of SETI scientists say, you know, the galaxy is just teeming with life. There are trillions of planets out there with life, and they're, you know, and technology. But you know, and then, you know, then there was the question that Enrico Fermi asked, you know, in the 1950s. Well, if they're out there, you know, where are they? You know, where's the evidence? So, you know, one possibility is that perhaps they're not as widespread as you suggest. They don't occur. There's not as many out there, and it's a low probability event to actually detect a signal from them. Well, I mean, we have been looking for 70 years, and but I mean, it's possible, and the embargo hypothesis is possible. But another but you know, I also then wonder, why is it that, and we have looked, and there is, you know, it's actually quite controversial about whether we've found evidence of life on Mars. You know, there was evidence from the early lander, the Viking lander experiments in 1976, that there were chemical reactions that were similar to metabolic, you know, indicating some kind of metabolic process. And maybe, you know, we will find some microbes. Maybe we just, you know, again, don't have the right technology. The arguments tend to be more circumstantial. It's like, you know, they say, well, the SETI scientists will say, well, look at, you know, the crazy life forms that develop on Earth near the volcanic vents on the bottom of the sea that metabolize sulfur, all these weird, you know, life forms, these weird chemistries and metabolisms. You know, certainly something like this has to exist on Mars. Well, maybe so, but, you know, sort of like, you know, like Fermi asked, you know, where's the, you know, if it's there, where's the evidence? We have been looking. It may be there, you know, but another possibility is that it's not there. And this diversity and all of this, you know, all of what we're talking about is not a purely physical phenomenon. And again, I tend to be a little bit more favoring this interpretation, just continuing to kind of follow the UFO phenomenon, because it is so inexplicable. You know, if it were a galactic federation, then there should be, you know, the Enterprise, and there should be like certain styles and patterns of craft and sightings. There should be some organized pattern. It's so the range, and they can the size of the objects go from just a few, you know, like a half a meter in size to miles in size, and the speeds go from tens of miles an hour to, you know, fractions of the speed of light, and the accelerations, you know, hundreds of thousands of Gs. So, I mean, is there some other technology there that we haven't discovered? It's possible. Have we developed it? I think it's doubtful, because if we had, I think Amazon probably would be using it to deliver packages. I don't know. We've become such a commercial society, materialistic society. It's hard to imagine that if we had this technology, we wouldn't be exploiting it commercially. You know, I mean, I don't mean to be cynical, but just to be blunt, I think if we had reverse engineered a flying saucer 70 years ago, I think people would be trying to you know, make money, capitalize on it. So I think there's something else going on here.
Oh, thank you, Mark. I think you are spot on about our consumer society, and that everything that's happening here is is all about the profit and not about the human beings. And this is one of the reasons we might not be as developed as we could have been. And we will obviously at the end talk about the conference we'll be organizing on December the 20th about how it is absolutely necessary to change the format of our society from consumer to creative one. And I think we share a lot of ideas in common, as all the other humans we've met actually during all these years. We've been asking people. But so let's get back to the topic of our discussion, and we'll get back to creative society a bit later. Okay.
Sure.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for your wonderful comments and feedbacks. Honestly, I could probably spend another 40 minutes discussing with you the hard questions all the sciences face right now, and the convergence point, if you will, of us addressing those questions. For example, what exactly is gravity, or what is the locality, non-locality issue of consciousness, and how does this, impact our ability to discern the information needed to make the discoveries, or even measure the potentiality of those discoveries, are all limited by these hard questions yet to be answered by numerous areas of science. And I think that's part of the issue, because when you get down these rabbit holes, you start to address metaphysical and materiality duality, right? And honestly, I don't believe we can answer those questions until we address what you mentioned as far as the consumer format. So I would like to get back to your work. You had mentioned the 5 ages our planet has gone through in the last 130,000 years, give or take. And I looked at your mathematical works of the alignment of different megalithic structures and groups of these structures to specific cardinal points. Can you please describe for us and our audience the structures and how they were built during these specific time frames, if we can extrapolate any of this information, or is there anything that corroborates this conclusion?
So it's a little bit of a So the way this sort of happened was I was looking at some ancient sites in Mexico, and back when I was doing my Mars research, we talked about the alignments on Mars and so forth, and I learned about Hapgood at that time when I was more interested in Mars than the Earth, so I remembered what he had his theory. And so I was looking at some structures in Mexico. Actually, the one I looked at was first talked about by Rose and Rand Flamath in their book, The Atlantis Blueprint, I think, or I forget, got the book over here someplace. I forget, but it's there. The Flamaths proposed the theory of Atlantis, where Atlantis is now Antarctica. It's at the South Pole. There's this whole idea based on it shifting, the crust shifting, and part of the way that story went was that when Flamath looked at the alignment of Teotihuacan, which is the ancient city in north of Mexico City, he found they're not aligned to the cardinal directions. They were misaligned to about 15 degrees east of north. And he determined that it would have been close to being cardinally aligned when Hapgood's, if you assumed Hapgood's Hudson Bay pole, it would have been, more or less aligned. He was actually more interested in what its latitude was. But the whole thing with Hapgood was that he believed that it was the Hapgood pole shift that was responsible for moving Atlantis from like a mid latitude in the South Atlantic to the Antarctic. But anyway, so that when I was actually going on vacation, I wanted to visit some of these sites, and I'm looking at the alignments. It's like, well, why are so many of them misaligned? In fact, in Mexico, the majority of temples and pyramids are not aligned north, south, east, and west. And so I spent actually a lot of time. Well, I spent some time in Mexico, but much more time in Google Earth, looking at the alignments with respect to Hapgood's poles. And I found that, yeah, they kind of seemed to line up, but it wasn't exact. So I thought to myself, well, Hapgood's estimates are based on climate data. You could move things around a little bit, not violate his climate assumptions. So maybe his estimates were just, estimates. So I came up with another set of estimates that were close. They didn't basically change any of his fundamental assumptions. And suddenly now I'm finding all these structures in not only in Mexico, but in other parts of the world are lining up to a pole near Hudson Bay, and structures that are, and then that left a lot of other structures unaccounted for. So it's like, okay, could those be aligned to other poles? So I looked at the Greenland pole, and it seemed like it's kind of a long story, and it's in the book, so I have to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion. But it's explained in the book how it works.
You use significant digits, right? When you were making these measurements, right? When you're saying Hapgood's is based off of estimates, you're saying just a little bit of fudging or moving it this way, and things were kind of aligned.
Yeah, I mean, so what I actually did was I started with a bunch of sites with their latitudes and longitudes and their orientations, and I wrote a program that looked at, basically did a search on all possible pole locations to find what pole locations explain the data. And it turns out that there are 4 that explain the data quite well, which are the ones that are in the book. So I actually used some site data to develop the pole locations that I used to explain the alignment of the site. So it's somewhat incestuous. That was with 50 sites. So after I wrote the book, I thought, well, it's part of my responsibility to go a little further and to say, okay, let's see if we can find any more sites. And I found there's well over, it's between 100 and 200 sites now that are aligned, that reference in some way these 4 previous pole locations. So in some cases they're cardinally aligned. In other cases, like Abydos, the Osirian, or the Temple of Seti, Seti I in Egypt, that there's really no explanation for its alignment today, but it turns out that it's aligned in the direction of the summer solstice sunrise relative to the Hudson Bay pole. There are many structures in India and in Central Asia. Some of the ancient Indus Valley cities that reference the Hudson Bay pole, which makes sense because the theory is, emergent theory is that in India, there was a before the Aryan invasion, there was this Harappan culture or Indus Valley culture. And about 20 years ago, there were some underwater surveys conducted in the Gulf of Cambay, where they found submerged structures that are perhaps 30,000 years old. So these would have been above water during that period of time, because during that period, and this is actually precedes the glacial max, the sea levels were much lower. And so a lot of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea would have been above water. And this is where they found these structures in India. And so their alignments, not underwater, we can't analyze them, not yet, but the ones in India, in that part of the world, in Turkmenistan and Central Asia, there are structures that reference the Hudson Bay pole. As they, and this is the same pole location that Teotihuacan appears to be directly aligned towards structures in temples in Egypt and in other parts of the world. So after finding, starting with Hapgood's locations, refining them using additional data, I was then able to and continue to look for more sites. So, you know, what I'm trying to do now is find more sites, more evidence, and see then how that sort of fits in with the early civilizations in those parts of the world. You know, all over the world, there's interesting stories, the early civilizations in Central Asia, the origins of the Zoroastrian faith, you know, of course, in the Vedic traditions in India, the Sumerians, the Egyptians. In Egypt, there are ancient texts that talk about history going back, you know, 30, 40,000 years ago. In Sumeria, there's the Sumerian kings list that go back hundreds of thousands of years ago. So with this sort of as my breadcrumb, I'm looking in these areas to see where I can, if there are structures that are aligned towards these previous pole locations. And it turns out that there are. So it's really kind of it's kind of an ongoing exploration right now to see how many additional sites I can find, and then evaluate them. Do they make sense in terms of what we know about, you know, those cultures? And then other people that I'm working with, like Mark Gaffney, who knows more about the climate, it is like asking, you know, then the question is, well, does it make sense? Were those places habitable at that time? Like, you know, today the Gobi Desert is not habitable, but in the back during, you know, before the last ice age, the climate was completely different there. So with pole shifts and changes in climate patterns, you have to ask the question, you know, in these different places, what was the climate like? Was it more conducive, less conducive? Teotihuacan, northern Mexico City, there seems to be extensive evidence that water played a major role in that culture, in that site. Yet it's, you know, it's a fairly dry, arid area. It's far from water right now. But during the time, if the pole were in Hudson Bay, it would have been had a much more temperate climate, and so it you know, could have made sense, much more sense then as a shrine celebrating water and the water goddess. So, you know, it's very interdisciplinary. It kind of makes your head spin, but it really takes a lot of people. It takes a village to figure this out. A lot of different areas of expertise. So the idea is, you know, you publish something, you put something out there, and someone sees it and they say, yeah, I got, you know, and then they go with it. So that's sort of, you know, what I'm hoping is going to continue, because that's the only way we're going to figure it out. We have to crowdsource the solution. We have to all work on it.
Yeah, thankfully we have ResearchGate and JSTOR and many open-ended sources where we can look at each other's published works and
right.
You know, start pursuing that and building off of each other's information. So it's definitely,
exactly,
we live in a great time to do that. And I think Anastasia has the next question. Thank you, Mark, so much for your detailed information, especially regarding the Hudson Bay, because it brings a lot of credence to what the Peruvians had mentioned, where their ancestors came from, if that is the case, you know, and a lot of different information we're finding about the Mayan culture coming into the Georgia mountains and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of puzzle pieces still that need to be answered. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And it is so amazing how you describe it. So, you know, like I wanted to ask why, in your opinion, like this ancient civilizations paid so much attention to the coordination, aligning monuments to the cardinal points or to reflect stars in the sky. Why do you think it was so important?
I think, you know, depending on who you ask, you can get different answers. If you ask someone that's very practical, like someone that plants crops, they'll say, well, I would like to have some kind of a natural, you know, celestial observatory or device for telling me when it's time to plant my crops or when it's about time to harvest the crops. So there's kind of the practical consideration, which, you know, might have been a reason why they built, you know, sites like Stonehenge. why the pyramids were built with such amazing precision of the cardinal directions, and so precisely engineered and so massive, may have been just a sort of a statement that just sort of an existential, like, we're here, we've done something amazing, and now, like, just be amazed by it, because clearly, if we're amazed by this, 2000 AD, if these structures are being around 2500 3000 BC, they must have been, I mean, even more mind-blowing back then. So I think the purpose in some of these structures, the sheer size, might have been just to create an emotional sort of response, and maybe as a way of triggering a spiritual or some other kind of non-mental reaction, because you're confronted with something that just cannot be explained. So when you can't explain it, you got to change. Something inside you has to change. And so perhaps they were designed to evoke some sort of profound response. I know when I saw the pyramids, I was speechless. I couldn't talk. There's no words. And so beyond that, the precision in the alignments could just be just another nail in, just demonstrating at so many levels how amazing they were, that they were able to achieve this. It's interesting though. There's also a lot of temples in Egypt that are thought to be aligned to stars. That the stars are correlated with the stories that go with the temples. And similarly, they in Greece, they believed for many years that a lot of the Grecian temples were aligned to the god on his or her feast day. But it's actually turning out that that's not the case. They're finding that's not true in Greece, and I don't know to what extent it's true in Egypt. I do know that it's the early work that was done. I think it was by Petrie. I can't remember, but it was basically rejected by Egyptologists because the dates they were coming up with were way were predated the dynastic period. I don't know. There seems to be certainly what's the word? A significance in alignments if you're trying to establish when they were built, and that could again be part of a story that a previous civilization might have been trying to tell, that we built this at a certain date, and by aligning it in this way, we're able to establish a dating of it that is that is not eternal, because the cycles do repeat, and anything longer than, say, a precessional cycle, you won't be able to determine. So if it's aligned to a precessional cycle, like the speculation is that the Sphinx was aligned to during the age of Leo, that the Sphinx and the pyramids were the reflection of heaven on earth, as articulated by Hancock and Bauval. And so, 10,500 BC or so is when that happened. But, with precessional cycles, you could add, 25,000 years to that, and, it would repeat itself. And that's the interesting thing about the pole shifts, is the pole shifts actually provide something that is seems to occur periodically, but it not being an astronomical cycle, it gives you a much stronger, if in fact pole shifts do occur, it could be an extraordinarily stable and reliable way of dating things. But the problem is that the whole theory is based on an unproven hypothesis that the crust actually does shift in this way. So, like everything else we've talked about, it's tricky. There's no clear-cut answers. But the weight of circumstantial evidence for pole shifts, I think, is increasing, and as is just periodic events, younger Dryas, events, types of events, and scientists are beginning to think about these much more, and their impact, and how they might have actually affected primitive people or not so primitive people at that time. And people are trying to piece that together in much the same way we all are using myth, legend, science of all kinds to try to do it.
Yes, thank you. I think it's quite a good approach, to question everything and to try to determine what really was happening, right? Anastasia, you wanted to add something?
No, it was really amazing answer, and I think like you making research in this area is definitely, probably we will find out the importance of these cardinal directions and what was going on the planet. And like, thank you very much for your work, what you're doing in that. I think it is very important.
Yeah, it's one of those things. You take a simple idea and you say, well, how, if this is what we've done, this is what we're doing now, and we've always done this, then what's, where does that lead? It's sort of, it's a simple step, but it can actually lead to some interesting, and I really didn't expect it would lead to anything. I was actually quite surprised, and I'm still amazed when I find these sites. Equal, and the amazement is in contrast to again the really profound lack of evidence for such a phenomenon for crustal shifts. I mean, and no one in the scientific community is talking about it, and they don't feel the need. They believe plate tectonics and other geological processes are sufficient to account for what's going on the planet. But much is not. I think scientists are at a loss to explain why the magnetic pole is moving as much as it is. There have been historically, there's a correlation between the location of the magnetic pole and the geographical pole. And they've in fact used that to infer that about 500 million years ago on Earth, there was a major crustal shift. I probably should have mentioned this. That was around the time of the Cambrian explosion. It's pretty well established that this occurred, and it was based on using magnetic data to infer a change in the position of the geographical poles. And the Cambrian explosion is a significant event because that's when most of the species on Earth today first became present by some mechanism. No one really knows. So, what happened? Why it happened then? If it happened then, perhaps it is happening now. But the evidence is direct evidence is lacking. All we can do is build a case based on circumstantial evidence, climate data, and perhaps some other data in the future.
Thank you so much. Now, Mark, maybe the last question we wanted to ask you that, we obviously see that you're passionate about your work and you've always been practical about the truth seeking. And we wanted to ask you what prohibits us from sharing this information and what can be done for us collectively to step over it?
Share, well, I think just by, from my understanding of what your organization is doing, I think, making this stuff available, getting people to read and think and communicate and brainstorm is, it's what's necessary. It's what we do as human beings. It's part of who we are, and I think it brings out the best part of us. It's our creative side, our interest in exploring the unknown, and it's really sad when you go on television and you look at a lot of the science channels. The science that's being talked about is so pedestrian, so mundane. It's because science has put everything in such a small box. Only the things that they think they understand, and anything else is like, that's, well, we're not going to talk about it. They ridicule you and marginalize your work, and they don't even criticize it, they ignore it. But it doesn't really matter, because if those of us that are not seeking university positions and funding, where those of us that are pursuing this independently, it doesn't really matter. We can pursue and communicate and use tools that are available widely now, thanks to the internet and modern human technology. So it's, I think, leading to some new possibilities. So it's an exciting time. And there's so many ideas are percolating. And I think what sounds like what you guys are doing, I know very little about it, but it sounds like we're all sort of the same mind.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Oh, we really enjoyed, and the time just flew by so quickly. Thank you for your honest answers, and we really appreciate your honesty and your openness to reply to all these, and for your work throughout all these years. It really also inspires us to search more. And actually, the Kaleidoscope Effect is only one of the projects we do as a team of volunteers throughout the world. Like, really, we have volunteers in every country. And this is because people, they just want to live in a better society. And a society where human life will be the most valuable thing, and everything will be built around it. And one of the foundations of the creative society is actually openness of information for all. And I guess that once we all voice our need to live in a society where everyone is happy, where human life is valuable, we will be living there, and we will talk openly about all these things. And this is why we really would want to invite you to the conference, which will be held online 20th of December. And just after we say goodbye to each other, we will show you the invitation trailer.
Okay, great. Let me also mention my website, beforeatlantis.com. is all this information is available online. It's all there, and there's a lot of video and graphics for anyone to take a look at, and they can contact me, and so it's out there, and I'm sharing it, and it's actually ongoing work that I'm doing right now. So as I come up with it, I'm posting it, and I get feedback, and one thing leads to another, and that's sort of what we're trying to do. So I encourage your listeners and your viewers to go to beforeatlantis.com. They can check out a lot of this content.
Yes, thank you. This is a valuable resource for anyone who is wanting to know more about this. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Every day, we share a great amount of information. This information forms our reality. Is this the way we wish to live? We need change. The change starts with us, with the information we share. Consumerist society leads us to death. We need a new vector of life, a creative society. It is up to you and me to build a creative society worldwide, where human life is the main value. Development of humanity is the main aim. Human safety is the main priority. Is it possible to build a creative society now? Yes. All we need to do is unite in one common idea, a creative society. People around the world are already acting to share the idea of creative society with the whole world to make it a reality. Learn how on the unique international online conference, Creative Society. United We Can. December 20th, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, live on Alatra TV. You are the one who can change the future.